Turn around! Hands behind your back, now!
I'm not resisting. You have no probable cause.
You don't get to tell me the law.
Actually, I do, and this arrest is...
The high-definition lens of the dashboard camera captured the scene in stark, unforgiving detail. The timestamp read 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and Officer Kyle Braden had absolutely no idea that the man he was currently shoving against the side of a rusted Ford F-150 was the Department of Justice's senior federal community liaison for the entire Mid-Atlantic region. The man in the handcuffs, whose face was pressed against the hot metal of his own truck, wasn't resisting. He wasn't shouting. He was Marcus Thorne, a man who had spent the last 25 years mediating conflicts between police departments and the communities they served. He had authored federal guidelines on de-escalation. He had sat across the table from governors and attorney generals. And now he was about to become the plaintiff in a civil rights lawsuit that would expose the rot inside the Oak Creek Police Department for the entire nation to see. Before we unravel the layers of this infuriating and vindicating story, I need you to take a moment. Pause right here. Go to the comments section and tell me where you are watching from, your city, your state. And if you believe that a badge should represent protection, not intimidation, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are building a community that values truth and accountability, and you don't want to miss how this story ends. Trust me, the fallout is biblical. Marcus Thorne did not look like a federal official that morning. At 58 years old, he was built like a retired linebacker who had kept in shape with broad shoulders and graying hair shaved close to his scalp. He wasn't wearing his tailored suits or his DOJ badge on a lanyard. He was wearing a faded navy blue t-shirt covered in sawdust, thick canvas work pants, and protective eyewear. He was doing what he did every Tuesday morning on his day off, helping his neighbor. Eleanor Vance was 78 years old, a widow who had lived in the house next to Marcus for 30 years. Her husband George had passed away 4 years prior, and the maintenance of their sprawling Victorian home had become too much for her. But she refused to leave. It was her home. It held her memories. So Marcus stepped in. He mowed her lawn. He cleaned her gutters. And on this particular Tuesday, he was replacing the rotted lattice work under her front porch. It was peaceful work. The neighborhood, a quiet enclave of oak trees and manicured lawns, was silent except for the rhythmic sound of Marcus prying old wood loose. He had parked his truck in Eleanor's driveway to have easy access to his tools. The scene was the definition of domestic tranquility, a neighbor helping a neighbor. There was no crime, there was no victim, there was only community. But to Officer Kyle Braden, patrolling slowly down Elm Street in Cruiser 402, the scene looked different. Braden was 29 years old, with 3 years on the force and a reputation for being proactive. In police jargon, proactive can mean diligent or it can mean aggressive. Braden viewed the world through a windshield that filtered everything into 2 categories, sheep and wolves. He saw a large black man with a pry bar kneeling at the foundation of a house owned by an elderly white woman. He didn't see the safety goggles. He didn't see the neat stack of new lumber waiting to be installed. He didn't check the address against a list of contractors. He saw a threat. Braden hit his brakes. He didn't call it in. He didn't run the plate on the truck, which would have come back registered to Marcus Thorne at the address directly next door. He didn't observe for a few minutes to see if the man was actually breaking in or building up. He simply threw the cruiser into park, stepped out, and let his bias take the wheel. The sound of the heavy car door slamming shut broke the morning silence. Marcus Thorne paused the pry bar in his right hand resting against the rotted wood he was removing. He didn't turn immediately. He took a breath, sensing the change in the atmosphere. He had worked in law enforcement adjacent roles long enough to know the sound of a police arrival. It had a specific cadence, hurried, heavy, authoritative. "Drop the weapon. Step away from the house." The voice was high-pitched, laced with an adrenaline spike that Marcus recognized immediately. In his training seminars, He called this cortisol voice, when an officer is so ramped up on their own fear response that they lose the ability to modulate their tone. Marcus slowly placed the pry bar on the grass. He didn't drop it. Dropping metal creates a sharp noise that can be startled into a gunshot. He placed it down with deliberate slowness. Then he stood up, dusting his hands on his pants, and turned around. Officer Braden was standing at the edge of the driveway, his hand hovering over his holster. The retention strap was already undone. His stance was bladed left foot forward, right foot back, ready to draw or fight. "Good morning, officer," Marcus said. His voice was a deep, calm baritone. It was the voice that had calmed riots in Baltimore and negotiated standoffs in Detroit. "I'm removing some rotted wood for Mrs. Vance." "I said step away from the house. Walk towards me. Keep your hands where I can see them," Braden shouted, ignoring the explanation entirely. Marcus didn't move towards the officer. He knew the law better than Braden ever would. He was on private property. He was engaged in lawful activity. He had no obligation to approach an officer who had not articulated a reasonable suspicion of a crime. "I am standing still, officer," Marcus said, keeping his hands open at chest level, the universal sign of non-aggression. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I live next door at 412 Elm. I am helping my neighbor with her repairs. If you look at the pile of lumber to your left, you will see the materials I purchased this morning." Braden's eyes darted to the lumber, then snapped back to Marcus. The evidence of innocence was right there, but Braden was already committed to the narrative in his head. Backing down now would feel like a loss of control, and for officers like Braden, control was everything. "I don't care where you say you live. We've had reports of burglaries in this area. You're holding a pry bar at a window entry point. That's possession of burglary tools. Now walk towards me or I will make you walk towards me." Marcus analyzed the situation instantly. Possession of burglary tools required intent. A pry bar used for construction in broad daylight was not a burglary tool. The reports of burglaries was likely a fabrication to establish probable cause. Crime stats in this zip code were negligible. Braden was fishing. He was manufacturing a crisis. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even steadier. "I am not going to leave the curtilage of this property. You are currently engaging in a consensual encounter. I am declining to engage further. Unless you can articulate a specific crime I am committing, I am going to return to my work." It was the wrong thing to say to a man with a fragile ego and a badge. Braden's face flushed a deep, angry red. He wasn't used to suspects using words like curtilage or articulate. He took 3 aggressive steps up the driveway, entering the private property without a warrant. "You think you're a lawyer?" Braden sneered, closing the distance. "I need to see ID, now." "I am not required to provide identification unless I am being detained for a crime," Marcus replied. "Am I being detained, officer? And if so, for what specific offense?" Braden stopped 5 feet from Marcus. The younger man was vibrating with tension. He was close enough now that Marcus could see the sweat beading on his forehead under the brim of his cap. "You're detained for investigation of a felony burglary," Braden spat out. "Now give me your ID." The front door of the Victorian house creaked open. Eleanor Vance stepped out onto the porch. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. She was wearing a floral housecoat and slippers, her white hair tied back in a loose bun. She had heard the shouting, though her hearing aids weren't in the volume of Braden's voice had penetrated the thick oak door. "Marcus," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Marcus, what's wrong? Is everything all right?" Marcus didn't turn his head, keeping his eyes locked on Braden, but he spoke loudly enough for her to hear. "It's fine, Eleanor. The officer is just confused. Please go back inside." Braden spun toward the old woman, his hand coming up in a "stop" gesture that looked more like a strike. "Ma'am, get back inside. Lock the door for your own safety." Eleanor looked confused. She looked from the angry young policeman to her friend Marcus. "He's fixing my porch," she said, her voice gathering a bit of strength. "He's my neighbor. He's lived here for 20 years. Young man, you are making a mistake." "I said get inside," Braden bellowed. He turned back to Marcus. "You know her. You got her intimidated. Is that it? She's scared of you?" Marcus felt a spark of genuine anger for the first time. The insinuation was disgusting, but he tamped it down instantly. Emotion was the enemy of survival in these moments. "Officer, look at the woman," Marcus said firmly. "She is not distressed. She is defending me. You are escalating a non-existent situation. I am asking you to de-escalate. Take a breath. Look around you. It's 11:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. I am wearing safety goggles. This is not a crime scene." Neighbors were starting to emerge. Across the street, Bill Henderson, a retired dentist, stood on his lawn with his arms crossed. 2 houses down, Sarah Jenkins was holding her phone up the camera lens pointed directly at them. The audience was growing. Braden sensed it too, but instead of making him cautious, it made him desperate to assert dominance. "I'm done asking," Braden said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "For what?" Marcus asked. "You have not established probable cause. You have a neighbor verifying my identity. You have visual evidence of construction work. Arresting me now would be a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights and a deprivation of liberty under color of law. Resisting arrest, obstruction." Braden listed off, reaching for his handcuffs. "You're failing to identify during an investigation. That is not a secondary offense you can arrest for without a primary crime." Marcus corrected him almost like a professor chiding a student. "Identify the primary crime officer." Braden didn't have an answer. He didn't have a crime. He had a feeling, and that feeling had been challenged. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's left wrist. Marcus didn't pull away. Pulling away is resisting. He went limp in the arm, allowing Braden to manipulate the limb. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated clearly for Sarah's phone recording. "I am complying under duress. I am stating for the record that this is an unlawful arrest." "Shut up." Braden yanked Marcus's arm behind his back with unnecessary force, twisting the shoulder joint. Marcus winced, but remained silent. He knew that any sound of pain could be interpreted as a struggle in a police report. "My wallet is in my back right pocket," Marcus said calmly as the first cuff clicked. "Inside you will find my driver's license. Behind that you will find my federal credentials. I strongly suggest you check those before you proceed." Braden ignored him. He slapped the second cuff on, tightening it until it bit into the skin. He spun Marcus around and marched him toward the cruiser, pushing him roughly. Marcus stumbled slightly but caught his balance. "You can tell it to the judge," Braden said, feeling a surge of triumph. He had won. He had taken the big man down. "Oh, I will," Marcus whispered too low for Braden to hear. "But not the judge you're thinking of." The walk to the patrol car was a parade of humiliation designed by Officer Braden. He didn't just walk Marcus, he paraded him. He kept a hand firmly on the back of Marcus's neck, a control hold usually reserved for combatants. The sawdust on Marcus's shirt brushed against the pristine uniform of the officer. As they reached the rusted Ford F-150 in the driveway, Braden shoved Marcus against it to pat him down. This was the moment caught on the dashcam, the violent impact of a compliant man being treated like a violent felon. "Spread 'em," Braden ordered, kicking Marcus's feet apart. Marcus complied. He stared at the reflection in his truck window. He saw a man who had spent decades fighting to make policing better, now being victimized by the very worst of it. He felt the officer's hands rifling through his pockets. Braden pulled out the wallet. He didn't open it. He just shoved it into his own cargo pocket. He pulled out the keys to the truck. He pulled out a folding pocket knife, a standard tool for cutting twine. "Weapon," Braden announced to no one, placing it on the hood of the cruiser. It's a tool, Marcus said. Just like the pry bar. Silence. Braden grabbed Marcus by the arm again and opened the back door of the cruiser. Get in. Getting into the back of a police car while handcuffed is difficult for anyone. For a man of Marcus's size, it was an ergonomic nightmare. He had to twist and contort his body. Braden didn't help. He watched hand on the door, impatient. When Marcus was halfway in, Braden slammed the door shut, forcing Marcus to pull his legs in rapidly to avoid them being crushed. Inside, the air was stale and smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat. The partition was a caged wall separating him from the front. Marcus shifted, trying to find a position that didn't cut off the circulation to his hands. Outside, he could see Eleanor standing on her porch, weeping. Bill Henderson had crossed the street and was yelling something at Braden. Braden was yelling back, pointing a finger in the older man's face. "Back off or you're next!" Braden shouted at the retired dentist. Marcus shook his head slowly. Witness intimidation, he noted mentally. Aggressive posturing towards bystanders. The list of infractions was growing by the second. Braden was digging a hole so deep he would never see the sun again. Braden finally got into the driver's seat. He was breathing hard, pumped full of adrenaline. He adjusted his rearview mirror to look at Marcus. "Not so tough now, are you?" Braden taunted. "Thought you could lawyer your way out of it." Marcus looked directly into the mirror-locking eyes with the young officer. He said nothing. He had already pivoted his strategy. The time for de-escalation was over. The time for litigation had begun. He would exercise his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent so thoroughly that it would haunt Braden. Braden started the car, revving the engine unnecessarily. He peeled out of the driveway, forcing the neighbors to step back. As they drove away from the quiet sanctuary of Elm Street, Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't praying. He was memorizing. He was replaying every second of the last 15 minutes, locking every detail into his mind. The angle of the sun. The exact words spoken. The force used. He was building his case file. The drive to the precinct took 20 minutes. For the first 5, Braden was high on his victory. He tapped on the steering wheel, checked his computer terminal, and radioed dispatch with a swagger in his voice. "1 in custody. Male black. Obstruction resisting possession of burglary tools. En route to station." "Copy that, 402, the dispatcher replied. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the silence from the back seat started to fill the car. Silence is a powerful weapon. Most people arrested can't stop talking. They beg, they plead, they threaten, they curse. They give the officer something to react to, something to justify the arrest. Marcus Thorne sat like a statue. He breathed rhythmically in through the nose, out through the mouth. He didn't ask where they were going. He didn't ask for water. He didn't complain about the cuffs. Braden glanced in the mirror again. "You got a record. Is that why you didn't want to show ID?" Silence. "I'm going to find it anyway. Once we print you, everything comes up. If you have warrants, you're done." Silence. Braden shifted in his seat. The silence was unnerving him. It felt professional. It felt like the silence of someone who knew something he didn't. "You're making this worse for yourself," Braden said, his voice losing some of its edge. "If you just cooperate, maybe I talk to the DA. Maybe we drop the resisting charge." It was a classic ploy, the fake offer of help. Marcus almost smiled. He had written the training module on why this interrogation technique was ineffective and unethical for patrol officers to use during transport. He kept his face impassive. Marcus's mind was working through the timeline of what would happen next. They would arrive. He would be processed. His property would be inventoried. And that was the moment the bomb would go off. He thought about the credentials in his wallet. The badge was silver and gold encased in heavy leather. It identified him as a special liaison to the Attorney General's office. It granted him clearance levels that Officer Braden couldn't even Google. It included a card with a 24-hour direct line to the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. Braden was driving a hearse to his own funeral and he didn't even know it. "Cat got your tongue." Braden snapped, the irritation returning. He turned up the radio, blasting talk radio to drown out the quiet. Marcus looked out the window. They were passing the city park, the library, the high school, places he had visited as a liaison to discuss community policing initiatives. He knew the chief of police, Robert Galloway. They had played golf 3 months ago at a charity fundraiser. He knew the mayor. He knew the watch commander on duty, Lieutenant Miller. Miller was a good man, tired but good. He was trying to reform the department. He had told Marcus over coffee that the biggest problem was the young cowboys who watched too many movies and didn't respect the community. Marcus wondered if Miller knew he had a cowboy like Braden loose in the field. He was about to find out. The cruiser turned into the precinct parking lot. Braden parked in the sally port, the secure garage for prisoner intake. The heavy metal door rolled down behind them, sealing them in. "End of the line," Braden said. He got out and opened the back door. "Let's go." Marcus stepped out. His legs were stiff, his shoulders burned, but he stood tall. He looked at the security cameras in the corners of the garage. He nodded once, acknowledging the recording. Braden grabbed his arm again, rougher this time, trying to provoke a reaction one last time. "Move it." They walked through the heavy steel door into the processing area. The smell of the station was familiar to Marcus, coffee floor wax and misery. This was it. The reveal was seconds away. The processing area was bright lit by humming fluorescent tubes. Behind the high counter sat Sergeant Tom Reynolds. Reynolds was 62, a man who had seen every kind of criminal and every kind of cop in his 40 years on the job. He was reading a report, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. "What do we have, Braden?" Reynolds asked without looking up. "Refusal to identify obstruction possession of burglary tools," Braden announced proudly. "Guy was casing a house on Elm Street. Tried to intimidate the homeowner." Reynolds looked up. He saw the large black man in the sawdust-covered t-shirt. He looked at the face. He paused. The face was familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. Marcus was usually in a suit when he visited the station, not work clothes. "Name?" Reynolds asked the prisoner. Marcus stayed silent. "He won't talk," Braden said. "He thinks he's smart." "I need his ID for booking," Reynolds sighed. "You get his wallet?" "Yeah, right here." Braden pulled the leather wallet from his cargo pocket and tossed it onto the counter. It landed with a heavy thud. Reynolds picked it up. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. Marcus Aurelius Thorne. The address 412 Elm Street. "Braden," Reynolds said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "His address is 412 Elm. Where did you arrest him?" 414 Elm, Braden said. "Next door. He was prying at the window." "He lives next door." Reynolds looked at Braden over his glasses. "Did you check that?" He claimed he did, but he was acting suspicious. Reynolds shook his head and flipped the flap of the wallet. There it was. The gold embossment caught the overhead light. United States Department of Justice. Federal Community Liaison. Executive level. Civil Rights Division. Reynolds stopped breathing for a second. He looked at the photo on the credentials. A man in a suit and tie. He looked at the man in handcuffs. It was the same man. Reynolds stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the file cabinet. "Unlock him," Reynolds said. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of impending doom. "What?" Braden asked, confused. "Unlock him. Now!" Reynolds shouted, his face going pale. "Sarge, he resisted. I have to process." "You just arrested the federal liaison for the DOJ, you idiot." Reynolds slammed the wallet down on the counter. "This is the guy who audits us. This is Marcus Thorne." The door to the inner office opened. Lieutenant Miller walked out holding a mug of coffee. "What is all the yelling out here I can hear you in?" Miller stopped. He looked at Marcus Thorne standing by the bench, hands cuffed behind his back, sawdust on his shirt. He looked at Officer Braden, who was looking confused and defensive. Miller's mug dropped. It shattered on the linoleum floor, hot coffee splashing everywhere. Nobody moved. "Mr. Thorne," Miller choked out. "Lieutenant Miller," Marcus said. His voice was calm, echoing slightly in the silent room. "I believe your officer has made a significant error." Miller moved faster than a man of his age should be able to. He rushed around the counter, pushing Braden aside physically. "Give me the key," he snapped at Braden. Braden fumbled for his keys, his hands starting to shake. I didn't know. He wouldn't show ID. He had a pry bar." Miller snatched the keys and unlocked the cuffs himself. The metal clicked open. Marcus brought his arms forward, slowly rotating his shoulders to work out the stiffness. He rubbed his wrists where red welts had formed. "I am so sorry," Miller said, his voice trembling. "Mr. Thorne, please. Come into my office. Let me get you some water. Let me call the chief." Marcus didn't move. He stood in the center of the booking room, looking at Officer Braden. Braden was shrinking, his bravado evaporating like mist. He looked like a child who had just broken a priceless vase. "I don't want water, Lieutenant," Marcus said. "I want to file a formal complaint, and I want the preservation order for all body cam, dash cam, and booking area footage signed immediately." "Of course," Miller said. "Anything. We can drop all the charges right now. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding." "No," Marcus said, his voice hard as steel. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a violation, and we are going to treat it as such." Marcus walked out of the precinct 40 minutes later. He refused a ride home from the lieutenant. He called his wife, who came to pick him up. He didn't say much on the ride home, but the fury was radiating off him. He didn't go to sleep that night. He went to his home office. He sat at his desk, still wearing the sawdust-covered clothes, and began to type. He didn't just write a complaint. He wrote a legal brief. He cited the specific statutes Braden had violated. Terry v. Ohio, Fourth Amendment, false imprisonment, deprivation of rights under color of law. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, the document was on the desk of the U.S. Attorney for the district. By 10:00 a.m., a courier delivered a copy to Chief Galloway. The reaction was instantaneous. The department tried to do damage control. Chief Galloway called Marcus personally, offering a public apology offering to suspend Braden immediately. "Suspension is a paid vacation, Robert," Marcus told the chief over the phone. "I'm not interested in your internal disciplinary matrix. I'm interested in why a man with his psychological profile was ever given a badge and a gun." 2 days later, the story leaked. Marcus hadn't leaked it, but the neighbors had. Sarah Jenkins posted her video. It showed the gentle giant of a neighbor explaining the lumber and the aggressive young cop screaming at him. It went viral locally, then nationally. The caption read, "Cop arrests federal agent for fixing neighbor's porch." The media descended on Oak Creek. Reporters camped out on Elm Street. They interviewed Eleanor Vance, who gave a scathing testimony about how that nice boy, Braden, had terrified her and arrested the kindest man in the world. Then came the lawsuit. It wasn't just about the arrest. Marcus's lawyers, the best civil rights attorneys in the state, friends he had worked with for years, subpoenaed Braden's entire personnel file. They found what Marcus knew they would find. Braden had 6 prior complaints in 3 years: excessive force, abusive language, racial profiling. All of them had been marked unsubstantiated by Internal Affairs. Unsubstantiated, Marcus told the press in a press conference held on his front lawn. That is the word they use to hide the truth. But you cannot hide from the camera, and you cannot hide from the Constitution. The lawsuit named Braden individually. It named the sergeant who signed off on the prior complaints. It named the city of Oak Creek for failure to train and supervise. It was a scorching earth strategy. Marcus wasn't looking for a settlement to go away. He was looking for a judgment that would force change. The discovery phase was brutal for the department. Marcus's team deposed Braden. Under oath without his uniform, Braden crumbled. He couldn't articulate the legal standard for reasonable suspicion. He admitted he didn't know who lived at the house. He admitted he was angry that Marcus challenged his authority. So, Marcus's lawyer asked, "You arrested him because he hurt your feelings." "I arrested him because he wouldn't comply," Braden mumbled. "Compliance with an unlawful order is not required by law, Officer Braden. Did they teach you that at the academy?" Braden had no answer. The end for Officer Kyle Braden came swiftly. He was terminated 3 months after the incident. The termination letter was public record. It cited gross incompetence, violation of civil rights, and conduct unbecoming. He was stripped of his certification, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. But Marcus didn't stop there. The Department of Justice, prompted by the undeniable evidence and their own liaison's involvement, opened a pattern or practice investigation into the Oak Creek Police Department. They found systemic issues with how the department handled stops of minority residents. 6 months later, the city signed a consent decree. It was a legally binding agreement to overhaul their use of force policies, implement mandatory bias training, and create an independent civilian oversight board. The board would have the power to subpoena officers and review all body cam footage. The city settled Marcus's lawsuit for $1.2 million. Marcus didn't keep a dime. He established the Eleanor Vance Legal Defense Fund, named after his neighbor. The fund provided free legal representation for residents of Oak Creek who had been victims of police misconduct but couldn't afford a lawyer. On a Tuesday morning 1 year later, Marcus was back in Eleanor's yard. He was painting the lattice work he had installed that fateful day. It was a bright, sunny morning. A patrol car drove by. It was a new officer, a young woman. She slowed down. She waved. Marcus stood up, put down his brush, and waved back. She didn't stop to interrogate. She didn't assume. She just waved and continued her patrol. Marcus watched the car disappear around the corner. He felt a sense of satisfaction, but it was heavy. He knew that if he had been a roofer named Jamal instead of a federal liaison named Marcus, he might still be in jail. He might have a felony record. He might have lost his job. He sat down on the porch steps next to Eleanor, who handed him a glass of lemonade. "You changed things, Marcus," she said, patting his knee. "We changed things, Eleanor," he corrected her, "but it shouldn't have been this hard." The sun was warm. The neighborhood was quiet. Justice had been served, but the scar remained. It was a reminder that authority without accountability is just tyranny in a uniform, and that sometimes the only thing standing between a citizen and a cage is the courage to say no. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have shown your ID to avoid the hassle, or would you have stood your ground to protect your rights? It's a question that's easy to answer from the comfort of your home, but much harder when the handcuffs are coming out. This story matters because freedom isn't free, it's rented, and the rent is due every day. Marcus Thorne paid his share. Now it's up to us to pay ours. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the nature of power and justice, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We are here to tell the stories that the system wants you to forget. See you in the next one.